Somebody do something.
Somebody do something. The most feared man in Beijing was on his knees on a hospital floor screaming at a room full of doctors who had already stepped back. Chu Yanfeng, whose name made grown men lower their voices in 3 provinces, whose organization had no official record, whose phone calls had ended careers and dismantled fortunes without a single raised voice, was kneeling on cold linoleum with his 8-month-old son pressed against his chest and tears running down his face, and not one person in that room could help him. The monitors were silent. The physicians had stepped back. The senior cardiologist had his hands pressed flat against the wall behind him. 4 minutes had passed since the last attempt. The room had gone still in the specific way rooms go still when everyone present has accepted something irreversible. Then the door opened, and a boy walked in. Enjoying the story? Hit that subscribe button and be part of this amazing family. And tell us where you're watching from. We love to know our viewers. Nobody noticed the boy, at first. He was 11 years old, Ghanaian, small for his age, wearing a worn gray school shirt with a tear at the left shoulder.
He had a backpack on.
He had muddy shoes. He had the particular quietness of a child who had spent enough time being invisible that stillness had become a habit rather than a choice. He looked at the baby. He looked at the doctors who had stepped back. He looked at the angle of the baby's neck and the color of his face, and something clicked behind his eyes, the specific click of a person who has read something 11 times and is now looking directly at it. He crossed the room before anyone could stop him. To understand what happened in those 60 seconds, you need to understand the 4 months before them. Kwabena lived with his mother Akojua in a 2-room apartment in Beijing's Daxing district. Akojua was Ghanaian, a widow, the specific kind of strong that doesn't announce itself. She simply showed up every day, regardless of what the day was asking of her. She worked the early morning cleaning shift at Beijing's Central Hospital, leaving at 5, home by 2, her uniform smelling of industrial cleaner and the tiredness of a woman holding an entire life together with both hands after the ground had shifted beneath her. Kwabena's father had died 2 years ago. A construction accident 3 months after they arrived in Beijing from Accra. Akojua had been left in a foreign city with a 9-year-old son, a visa tied to a husband who no longer existed, and a choice between going home to a life that was no longer there or staying and building something from whatever remained. She stayed. Kwabena went to school on a church scholarship. He was quiet, studious, the kind of child teachers noticed eventually rather than immediately. He borrowed textbooks after class. He read during breaks. 2 years ago, he had found a worn medical book in a donation box outside a pharmacy near the hospital where his mother worked. Its spine already splitting, its pages soft with previous handling, and he had taken it home and read it until the spine split completely, and he had taped it back together with masking tape and kept reading. That book had a chapter on infant airway obstruction. What to do when a baby inhaled fluid. How to position the body. The angle of the head. The gentle pressure. How gravity, used correctly, could clear an airway that medical machinery had failed to reach. He had read that chapter 11 times. He had memorized it the way you memorize something you love, before you understand why. That morning he was sitting on the low wall outside the hospital waiting for his mother's shift to end. Their routine, every Thursday walk home together, stop for warm soy milk from the cart on Guangming Road, when a man ran past him. Not jogging, not hurrying. Running with the total abandon of someone for whom speed had become the only remaining option, with no awareness of who was watching because something had overridden everything except the emergency in his arms. Kwabena saw the bundle pressed against the man's chest, saw the color of the baby's face under the entrance lights. He stood up and followed. He slipped through the emergency entrance behind a family, followed the raised voices down the corridor, through a set of doors still swinging, into a room where the monitors had just gone silent. He stood in the doorway. He saw the baby's fingers twitch. Just once. So small that everyone else had already moved past it. The physicians had already stepped back. But Kwabena saw it because Kwabena was looking for it, because the book had said that sometimes there is still something there, still something to work with, and the difference between what was possible and what was over could be a single degree of angle and 30 seconds of patience. He crossed the room. He reached the examination table. A physician stepped forward. Who are you?
How did you get in here?
You cannot. Please, Kwabena said, not turning around. His voice was quiet and entirely steady. Just give me 1 minute. Something in that steadiness stopped the room. Not authority, not volume. Something else, the particular calm of a person who is not performing confidence but actually has it, the kind that lives in a boy who has read the same chapter 11 times in a 2-room apartment in a foreign city because knowledge was the one thing no circumstance had been able to take away from him. He positioned the baby the way the book described, supported the head and neck precisely, angled the body so gravity could do what it was designed to do, applied gentle pressure to exactly the right place. The room held its breath. 40 seconds. The baby coughed, then cried. The room collapsed into motion all at once. Doctors rushing forward, monitors being reattached, a nurse stopping completely still with both hands pressed over her heart. Xu Yanfeng, still on the floor, made a sound that had no name. Kwabena set the baby gently on the examination table, stepped back, picked up his backpack from where he dropped it by the door, and turned to leave. Wait. Yanfeng's voice, still on the floor,
Still not standing.
still looking at his son breathing on the table with the specific expression of a man who has just been pulled back from the worst moment of his life. Kwabena stopped. Yanfeng looked at him, this boy in the torn gray shirt with the muddy shoes who had walked into a room where doctors had given up and refused to accept what everyone else had already accepted. What is your name? He said. Kwabena. How did you know what to do? Kwabena reached into his backpack. He pulled out the book. Its spine was taped. Its pages were soft with handling. He held it out. Yanfeng looked at the book, looked at the boy, looked at the book again. Where do you live? He asked. Kwabena opened his mouth to answer. The door opened. She came through it fast, not running, but close, the walk of a woman who had been searching for 20 minutes and had finally been pointed to the right floor by the third person she'd asked. She was Ghanaian, early 30s, wearing her hospital cleaning uniform, pale blue, her name badge still clipped to the chest pocket, her cleaning cart abandoned somewhere on the floor below when a security guard had told her a boy matching Kwabena's description had been seen going through the emergency doors. She did not see the doctors. Did not see Yanfeng still lowering himself from the floor. Did not see the monitors or the medical team or any of the several extremely significant things happening in the room. She saw her son, Kwabena. She crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of him and pulled him into her arms the way mothers hold children after fear, completely, both arms, face pressed into the top of his head. Kwabena let her hold him. He was 11 and he had just saved a life and he still needed his mother's arms around him, which was exactly correct. What happened? She said into his hair. They said you followed someone through the emergency doors. I've been looking everywhere. What were you doing in here? Mama. His voice was muffled against her shoulder. I helped the baby. She pulled back and looked at his face. What baby? His baby. Kwabena pointed. Akojua turned. She saw the room for the first time. The doctors. The monitors. The medical team. The baby on the examination table, breathing. A nurse watching his chest rise and fall with focused relief. And the man standing 10 feet away. She knew that face. She had known it for 6 hours, since that morning, when he had walked through the 4th floor corridor where she was mopping and told her, in front of 3 colleagues, to move her cart because it was blocking the path he had decided to walk, and when she had pointed out, politely, that the wet floor sign was up and the alternative route was clearly marked, he had looked at her the way men like him sometimes looked at women in cleaning uniforms, through her, essentially, like she was a minor obstruction rather than a person, and told her that her job was to make the building convenient for the people who mattered, not to explain signage to them. She had been right. He had been wrong. He had known he was wrong. He had walked away anyway after calling her disgusting. She had gone back to mopping. She had been right about that too. Now she was kneeling on the floor of his son's emergency room in her cleaning uniform, and her son was the reason his son was breathing. The room was very quiet. Yanfeng looked at Akojua, at her uniform, at her name badge, at the specific recognition crossing her face. He had placed her the moment she walked through the door, the 4th floor corridor, The wet floor sign, the conversation he had handled badly and known it immediately and walked away from anyway because men like him had never fully learned how to turn around and say so. He had been wrong this morning. Her son had saved his child this afternoon. He stood with that for a moment. Then he crossed the room, and he did something that the people who worked for him would speak about in lowered voices for years afterward. He stopped in front of her, this woman on her knees in her cleaning uniform who had every reason to look at him with nothing but cold satisfaction, and he bowed. A full, proper bow. Not a nod. Not a gesture. A bow, held for 3 full seconds, his eyes on the floor. "I was wrong this morning," he said, straightening. "I spoke to you in a way that was disrespectful and incorrect. I am sorry." Akosua looked at him. She had been holding her son's face in both hands. She did not let go of it. "You were wrong," she said simply. Not unkindly, just accurately. "Yes. And my son saved your child." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. The expression on her face was not triumph. It was not softness either. It was the specific expression of a woman who has been surviving something difficult for long enough that she no longer needs other people's recognition of it, but appreciates honesty when it finally arrives. "Thank you for saying so," she said. Then she looked back at her son, took his face in her hands again, looked at him properly. All of him, the torn shirt, the muddy shoes, the taped book still in his hand. "You did this," she said. "I read about it," Kwabena said. "In the book. I practiced the position in my head many times." Akosua looked at the book, looked at her son. Her jaw moved once. "Your father," she said quietly, "would be so proud of you." Kwabena leaned his forehead against hers. 11 years old, and entirely his mother's son. In the room around them, not one person spoke. Yanfeng found them in the corridor 20 minutes later. He had stayed with his son until the medical team confirmed everything that needed confirming. Airways clear, oxygen levels stable, no further intervention required. A nurse who kept saying remarkable under her breath every time she checked the monitors. Then he walked into the corridor where Akosua sat on a bench with Kwabena beside her, the taped book open on his lap, pointing something out to her on the page. He sat down across from them. Not beside them. Across, leaving the distance of a man who understood he had not yet earned proximity. "I want to ask you something," he said to Kwabena. "Not as a favor. As a genuine question." Kwabena looked at him. "What do you want to do with your life?" No child his age had ever been asked that question by someone who looked like they intended to act on the answer. Kwabena understood this immediately, the way children who have spent time being invisible understand immediately when they are being genuinely seen. "I want to be a doctor," he said. "Or a paramedic. Someone who knows what to do when everyone else doesn't." "Why?" "Because my sister almost died when I was 6 and a paramedic saved her. And I decided then that I wanted to understand what he understood. To be useful in the moments that matter." Yanfeng looked at this boy for a long time. Then he looked at Akosua. She was watching him with the careful expression of a woman who had learned through experience to wait and see what people's words actually produced before deciding what to feel about them. "I would like to help him," Yanfeng said to her. Not to Kwabena. To her. Because she was the parent, the guardian, the person whose trust was the actual prerequisite. Not as charity. As investment. The same way I have invested in every person I have ever backed because I identified something rare and I wanted to make it possible for that thing to grow. "He is 11 years old," Akosua said. "I know. I started earlier with worse material." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. "He is something I have spent 20 years looking for in boardrooms and never found as cleanly as I found it in that room. He saw what everyone else missed. He stayed when everyone else stepped back. That is not something you teach. That is something you build around." Akosua looked at her son. Kwabena was looking at the book in his lap, trying, not entirely successfully, to look like he wasn't listening to every word. "What does help look like?" she said. "School, a proper one with science facilities, teachers who can match what is already in his head. Tutors twice a week. A library access that doesn't expire. And stability." He paused. "For both of you, not just him." Akosua was quiet for a long moment. "I don't need your help," she said. I need to be clear about that. We are surviving. I know you are. I watched you this morning. You were right about the floor sign. You were doing your job correctly, and I was rude to you and walked away. He held her gaze. Surviving is not the ceiling I'm offering. I'm offering something higher than that. He earned it this afternoon. So did you. 2 years of raising a child who reads medical textbooks in a 2-room apartment because he wants to understand how to save people. He looked at Kwabena. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because of who his mother is. Akosua pressed her lips together. Kwabena, who had given up pretending not to listen, looked up at his mother. She looked at him for a long moment, the look of a woman measuring everything against the single question that actually mattered.
Kwabena, she said.
Yes, Mama. What do you want? He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything. I want to learn, he said, properly, with real books that aren't from donation boxes.
He paused.
And I want to keep this one, he added, holding up the taped book. Even after. Nobody is taking that book, Yanfeng said. The arrangement that followed was not charity. Yanfeng had been clear about that from the beginning, and Kwabena had been clear he would not have accepted it as such. It was investment, documented, structured, with terms both parties understood. Kwabena was enrolled in a school within the month, one with science laboratories and teachers who had to recalibrate their assumptions about what an 11-year-old already knew by the end of his first week. Akosua was offered a position in the hospital's administrative support team, a transition she had the skills for and had simply never been given access to. She took it because it was genuine, and because she had worked hard enough for long enough that accepting something real was not the same as accepting charity. Kwabena attended every class, every tutoring session, every science elective available to him. He asked the kind of questions that made teachers pause and then search for better answers. He was, by any measure, extraordinary. But the thing Yanfeng told people when they asked about him was not about grades or test scores. It was about the morning, 6 months after the enrollment, when Yanfeng visited the school and found Kwabena in the corridor at lunchtime, sitting with a first-year student who had been struggling with a biology concept that the rest of the class had moved past. Not asked to help, just helping. Patient, clear, explaining it the way he had learned things himself, one careful piece at a time, with real interest in whether the other person actually understood. Yanfeng stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. Then he walked back to his car and called his deputy. The boy I told you about, he said. The one from the hospital. Double the education fund. For what reason? His deputy asked. Yanfeng thought about a room where everyone stepped back, about a child who stayed. The same reason as the first time, he said. He did it again. For years later, Kwabena stood at the front of a regional medical symposium at 15 years old, the only secondary school student in the room, invited by a physician who had been in that hospital room the day Kwabena was 11 and had never stopped thinking about it. He presented a paper on infant airway management in emergency settings. He stood at the podium in a proper school blazer with a taped book visible in his bag on the chair beside him, because he had decided years ago that it was going where he went, regardless of what else he acquired. When the questions came from the floor, he answered them the way he always had, carefully, without performance, with the particular steadiness of a person whose confidence had been built not from praise but from knowledge earned in difficult circumstances and used precisely when it mattered most. Akosua sat in the 4th row. She was wearing her own clothes, not a uniform. She had a program in her hands that listed her son's name and his institution and his paper title, and she had read it approximately 14 times since she arrived, and she was going to read it 14 more before the day was over. Yanfeng sat 2 seats from her. Neither of them had planned it. The organizers had simply placed them in the same row. At some point during the questions, when Kwabena was standing at the podium handling a technical challenge from a senior physician with the composure of someone twice his age, Yanfeng leaned slightly toward Akosua. You raised that, he said quietly, nodding toward the front of the room. Akosua watched her son for a moment.
He raised himself, she said.
I just made sure the lights were on. Yanfeng said nothing else. On the podium, Kwabena answered the final question, thanked the room, and picked up his bag, the taped book visible through the unzipped pocket, its spine mended and remended and mended again, carrying 11 readings and 4 years and 1 afternoon in Beijing when a boy who had been invisible decided to stay. The room applauded. Akoshua did not clap with her hands. She pressed them flat against the program in her lap and looked at her son standing at that podium and let herself feel, completely and without management, exactly what she had earned the right to feel. Everything.
The end.